EnviroFlight, and he will be talking about foraging a new frontier in protein supply in aquaculture and food production.
Well, good afternoon. Does everyone need to stretch? A little stretch? Yeah, it feels good. Well, my name's Glen Courtright, and I'm the president and founder of a company called EnviroFlight. And let's find my little key here. So today's a pretty long topic, foraging a new frontier, but we're going to call it something different. We're going to call it Bugs Save the World. I'll give you a little background about myself. My career actually started not as a biologist. I started off going into the U.S. military at a very young age. I was a non-traditional student, got a degree in engineering from Southern Illinois. Then I went into heavy industry, mainly in aerospace, and then went into oil and gas, telecom, and meanwhile I wrapped up my career as a reserve officer in the Navy. So I went from an E1 to commander over a long period of time. But in our careers, we always have an aha moment. And mine was in early winter of 2005. And I was working as a consultant for a big engineering company, and I was sent up to the North Slope of Alaska. And I was doing something completely unrelated to this industry. And if you look at this picture, see if I can find my little laser pointer here. See that flag? We got up there in November, and it's probably near 0 degrees. And we wanted to go out to a remote site, and we couldn't get out to this place. So I asked our sponsor, why can't we get out to site so-and-so? Well, we don't have any ice roads built yet. And I was saying, what the heck is an ice road? So they explained what was happening, and they said normally in the past, ice roads were built around October, November. And now they're building ice roads in January. What's happening is warming up. So I was up there for a few days and looking outside my window and seeing these big gas plumes going off. And what's happening is everyone up there in the North Slope knows that the climate is warming. And if you look at that, it's essentially a frozen peat bog, which is sequestered methane. And we all know in this audience that methane is about 10 times more potent than CO2. Well, this isn't a story about kind of getting a green epiphany. What this was trying to solve a problem, and through my education and through my commercial experience, I've always been trained to solve problems. I always kept on asking the question, well, why? Well, why not? Why can't we do this? Well, what happened was that caused me to look at something different, look at an alternative. So I really got interested in renewable fuels, in particular biodiesel. So in 2006, I embarked on a program, self-funded, to find ways to actually create biofuels. At this point, the company I was working for, which was SAIC, and I was an executive at SAIC running a very large practice, and some of you remember who that company used to be. And we were always engaged in trying to solve problems for very difficult societal impacted problems. Well, what happened was I got 2 years into this program and realized that the government changed its philosophy and approach on renewable fuels. But I really liked the idea, so I looked for all different alternatives. So I looked at single-cell proteins, and not being a biologist, being an engineer, I saw, well, this is going to be a very difficult problem to solve, and a few of the folks I worked with at BP went into this area, and they still haven't commercialized. So the next one was algae, and algae from a scale perspective would be very difficult just to getting enough photons into the water column and separating the algae from the water, getting the oil separated. And at that point, I was about ready to give up. At this point, I was working on my own, spending my own money. And imagine this, about 3 engineers are in a bar in Adrian, Michigan, outside of an ethanol plant. And I'm kind of going through the story going, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I really want to try and find a solution. So one guy says, you know, bugs are 50% oil by volume. You could turn insects into fuel. So we all got a good chuckle out of it. And I saw an opportunity. So I had no idea what type of bug to work. So essentially, I ran a beauty contest. And all the literature was out there. So you can use a mealworm, you can use a soldier fly, you can use I didn't know. So it's basically the answer was something called the black soldier fly. It's an insect that's native to North America. There's been some very early research on this. University of Georgia did some work on this. And essentially, this insect is what we call a non-pathogenic insect. So as a fly, it doesn't eat. Therefore, it doesn't eat, it doesn't regurgitate, it doesn't take up nutrients. It spends most of its life as a larva. And the larva is a voracious eater. Well, thinking, oh, smart guy. So I read all the research back in 2009, and at that point, there were maybe about 4 or 5 papers that were written. And the papers that were written were focusing on small-scale applications with hypotheses of how to do a large-scale system. Well, thinking I was a pretty good engineer, I said, well, I think this is solved. So I built 3 prototype machines, each machine 1,200 square feet. Bought some insects, got them into the bioconversion, and guess what happened? They died. So I regrouped to try it again. They died. And the third time, they died again. So at this point, I said, all right, Glenn, you're backing up. Don't do ready, fire, aim, do ready, aim, fire. So I took a step back, and not doing very well in biology, may focus on systems engineering and problem solving. I went after this as an electrical engineer would solve a problem. So I broke this into the individual life cycle of an insect. And this is exactly in a temporal way, but first of all, we had to get them to mate, had to collect the eggs, how do we get them to lay their eggs not in the dead bodies and keep this entire life cycle separated, and built a series of standalone modules, and none of which was ever documented in the literature. People were raising insects in small pans, and I'm attempting to raise insects in hundreds of square feet to create something very large scale. Well, here we go. So this is our breeding system, and this is covered by a patent. This is something I designed back between 2009 and 2012. Each of those cages can produce about 20 grams of eggs per day. And to give you an idea of the magnitude, is in 1 cubic meter of free fly space, we get 20 grams of eggs per day on an average basis. Through our feeding, we're getting between a 7,000 and 10,000 growth factor, which means 20 grams of eggs times 8,000 is 160 kilograms. Every day in one of these breeding modules, we get a 160 kilogram live animal after 3 weeks. We do this 365 days a year, regardless of weather conditions. We can do it in greenhouses, or now we can do it with artificial light. And kind of an interesting story about this. This is kind of, we call this Love Shack version, probably version 10. The first one was a 200 square foot greenhouse with cages we built by hand. And we tried every combination of light that we can figure out. And one day, we think we got it right. So this was on it kind of sounds like a bad novel, not a dark and stormy night, but it was a snowstorm in December in Ohio. And we finally believed we figured out the right lighting sequence, and we waited for things to get completely, almost blizzard conditions, and we started flipping lights. And we hit the right light combination, and we had instantaneous mating. So this has evolved since 2009 to 2016 into something that's completely predictable. We do here, think of a big dresser drawer with with an airflow system, so we're always kicking flies into the cage at the right period of time, get them to mate on command. We have certain media, we collect the eggs, and this is now in production mode, and we've got a team of 20 people that work at the plant, and we can put this anywhere in the world. And that's what happened. That's what we're looking for. So your question is, yes, we have very happy insects. No one's been neutered. There are no eunuchs at EnviroFlight. So we call it the Love Shack. Now, what we have here, so I can turn the volume down, these are the eggs. Now imagine, this is a prototype system we're working on here, but those are the size of the eggs, and we're collecting these things 24 hours a day. Now, you can't exactly count them. So what we have to do is we have to ensure that these eggs are collected, we keep them alive, we don't want them desiccating, but we don't want the sidewalls too wet, because otherwise they crawl out. These things are wonderful escape artists. So you think about trying to corral something the size of the head of a pin. And we always kind of look at this as, well, how much did we get off the floor today? And so we think our yields are getting better and better every week. So today we're in a small pilot facility. There's about 20,000 square feet of pilot plant production. We're producing probably twice as many eggs as we need on a daily basis. So the numbers here, you can start doing the math. 20 grams a day per cage times 8,000 as a growth factor, and we've achieved 10,000 on some feedstuffs. And we are at what we call the Model T stage of this, because right now the science hasn't been documented on this. So the next thing we look at is bioconversion. Okay, we're not giving away anything secret here, but if you read the literature, the early stage stuff was create a big pit, throw in a bunch of rotting food, add insect larvae, and hopefully they crawl out. Well, that's a good way to just generate something that smells terrible and is going to die, is unpredictable. And when I started this, I had a very, very weak stomach. And I was working by myself. And there were times, a few other with me. And so basically what this has evolved to is a sequential batch system. So these are one of our advanced prototype systems. If you notice, we have gone vertical, so we call the bug skyscraper, and each one of those are filled with insect larvae. They go in after they leave the hatchery. They go in about day 7 to day 10, and we can talk about some ways how we speed up production or we can slow it down. But essentially, in a 2-foot by 4-foot space, is we can process in raw material about 3.2 to 4 tons per year in one of those little bins. And when they're in production, we can actually cycle our production rates. For example, we set our baseline normally about 12 days. We can do it in 10. And it's all about how do we accumulate how many degrees over a period of time. We know the right temperature range, the right feedstock range, and certain feedstocks perform better. It's all about what we call nutrient density and particle size. So this is one of our baseline feedstocks. And when we founded the company, is we wanted to make sure we were going to recover nutrients from waste products. So this feedstock here is something we call cookie meal. So if you look in the US, 35 to 40% of the food we produce goes into a landfill or is underutilized. So this particular feedstock is recovered cookies and crackers and bread, donuts, saltines, candies that are collected, dried down, and we use this as our baseline feedstock. Now we've already tested probably close to 50 different types of raw materials, everything from animal proteins to, we have not ventured into the animal waste business because of regulatory issues and public perception, which doesn't preclude us from doing that in the future. But essentially on this substrate, and sometimes we work with the output of distillers dry green with solubles because, in Ohio you can't swing a dead cat without hitting an ethanol plant. So there's plenty of DDGs around. And essentially out of this material is we get very predictable yields, and we get a finished product that actually looks good, smells good, and I'm not a big fan of eating bugs, but we'll show you some things here in a minute here. Well, this is what we wind up with. This is one of our bioconversion bins, and that's filled with a big pile of writhing, twisting associates. Yeah, basically we call the M word is verboten inside EnviroFlight. M stands for maggot. So, but this is how clean it is, and you can actually put your hand through it. And for us, what we're doing now is we're trying to really push our densities up. And the residual material there, the uneaten feed, we call that frass. But basically, is now we're getting to the point of probably 70% of the non-inerts are consumed by the bugs. And what we have here is a technology that balances their waste production versus their feed conversions. And now we're to this point, we're kind of slicing the onion thinner and thinner and thinner without impacting animal health. So it's kind of a very interesting evolution. Well, this is what we wind up with. This is the first fraction that comes off, and that is a dried insect larvae. So as they're harvested, and we catch them before they form their hard exoskeleton. So what we try to do here is we want to minimize the chitin production and enhance the amount of protein and fat that's produced. So we know exactly when to harvest. And so these things here is we have a couple of different drying techniques, and this one particular technique is this product goes into the commercial marketplace today, And it's got to look good, it's got to smell good, for a bug, it has to have decent quality cues. Now, the next step along the road here is we're actually producing a meal. So what's going in here, and this thing runs a couple days a week, and this is a press. So we take those dried larvae, and we're extracting the fats. And there's the fat right there. And we have some slides here on the actual composition, but it's a nice amber, clear oil. And we're doing this without any solvents, no chemicals, and we have a couple little techniques there. So I did not bring samples for today. Now this is the meal. So then we take that kind of that big noodle, and that material goes into another product stream. So today we're selling dried larvae. We saw that before. We're selling the meal, and we also sell what they don't eat as a fertilizer. And we're working a couple different markets for the oil today. Now, a lot of people ask me how it tastes. It has kind of a, Corey's tried it. What do you think? Nutty flavor. And what does it smell like? Those. Sarah? Those are good. Bugs. No. It smells like a Triscuit without salt. A good way to look at it. And so what we've got here is, if you look at the composition of it, and this is just the dried larvae itself, as an aside, you'll see an actually approved definition from AFCO this year on the dried larvae, which has been approved for the use in salmonids. And we hope to have that definition expanded within a year to take all these species exclusions off. So it's moving in the right direction. But what we normally do with this is we try to hit a protein level of about, I like to shoot for about 39 to 40% and about 40% fat, and that's determined on the type of feedstock that we're using. And now with the experience we have with the variety of raw materials we've pushed through these, is we can actually dial in where we need to. But the key thing we look for here is a calcium-phosphorus ratio. Now, an insect has a specific nutrient need just like any other animal on the planet, and what we've learned here is how to optimize the diet or to take a low-grade feedstock and augment it to actually boost and enhance our production levels. There is the fatty acid profile, and I think the key thing I want you to take a look at here is up here on C12.0. We can boost those levels up, and what we've learned is the higher the carbohydrate content of the raw material, the more lauric acid they produce. And we could even give them a feed without any lauric acid in it, and they will produce lauric acid. Everything else on the C16s and 18s pretty much instantiates what they're fed. So essentially, you are what you eat. And there's amino acids, so I won't get into the details here. And the meal itself, we extract the meal out, and we're about 52 to 53% protein, but for our labeling, we have to kind of dumb it down a little bit just to be in the safe side for traceability. Now, we have done a series of feed trials. I'm not going to get into the feed trial basis, but we work very closely with USDA ARS up in Bozeman, Montana, and a few other sources. And what we found with this is the insect meal and the dried larvae work very well as starter feeds for trout. It was one of the, I think if you look at some of Dr. Barrow's published studies, is we saw really good performance over all other alternative ingredients. And what we're envisioning here is there's a palatability effect here, what's going on. And we'll skip these eye charts. Now, we talk about customers. Now, as we were going through the regulatory approach, we sell a lot of the dried larvae and the meal into the specialty pet food sector. And our approach was never to sell product into the marketplace until we received regulatory approval. But being an entrepreneur, I wanted to make sure I had product sales to offset my R&D cost. So we sell into a number of zoos. So this is our friend the sloth bear. So dried larvae from EnviroFlight are sold in a number of zoos and are tossed into the sloth bear cage to get the sloth bears, which are normally slothy. And basically it's used for an entertainment factor, and these things will just wander around and just pick up the bugs. Another one is we sell another product into a feed that's called grub pie, which is through a customer of ours called Alan Rapace Superfoods, which is 70% insect meal, and this is sold worldwide. And as a kid, I didn't like lizards, and now I'm feeding lizards. And you're supposed to say, "Aw." Oh, there we go. So that's our friend the sugar glider, and these things are about that big, and people keep them in their pockets. So, we're the #1 sugar glider ingredient producer in North America, which I never thought we'd be doing that. And the girls never lie. So we sell a product that goes through a number of distributors in the U.S. It's the dried black soldier fly larvae, and is a natural chicken feed. And we're basing our first commercial launch of this moving into the specialty pet food sector as we begin to scale up. And what we're doing here is we're competing against imported Chinese mealworms. This is the only dried insect available in the market in the U.S. And what we're able to do here is we can prove full traceability of all of our ingredients. The customers like it, made in the USA. It smells good, it looks good, and it's fresh. And we're cost competitive. So we have 2 major distributors right now online. We sell everything we can make today, and we can't produce enough. And so far, so good. Well, if we go back to some of the founding principles of why we founded EnviroFlight, it wasn't to feed chickens and lizards and sloth bears and sugar gliders. It was to recover the nutrients from material that normally goes into the landfill. And this, I think you've all seen this chart. It's a food recovery hierarchy chart. Well, the cheap way to do it is just throw it in a landfill and forget about it. And we can't continue as a culture to do this. We have to find better ways. Composting is, there's, topsoil's free. Industrial uses, for example, are one of our partners, which is Darling Ingredients, is in the rendering industry. But what we look at here is we're not looking to feed people. What we want to do is feed animals. So there's a tremendous amount of raw material available for nutrient recovery, and insects are the perfect mechanism for that transformation. Now, I wasn't crazy when I started this. And in parallel, in 2000, I believe this is Sarah, 2013, I believe, the UNFAO issued a report called Edible Insects and Future Prospects for Feed and Food Security. And who's that handsome guy? So we were put on the cover of the UNFAO report. And what happened there is that publication began to change things. Now, what the UN's premise was is in today we have 1 billion people that go to bed hungry every single night. And the highest potential for population growth in the world are in areas where they don't have enough water and don't have enough raw material. And this report wasn't about feeding bugs to people. It's about finding better ways of actually increasing the protein source. At that point, we were a lone voice in the wilderness that was promoting using insects to recover nutrients to feed our livestock. And at that point, things began to take off. And in parallel, there were 3 other companies in the world, and none of us knew each other, that were embarking on this mission. And I think all of us we're still out there. Well, if you look at protein production per acre, as a way to look at this, it's all about how much protein one can produce in a finite amount of space. So if you like beef, you're going to get about 20 pounds of protein that can be metabolized per acre on an annualized basis. Corn's about 200 pounds. Soy's about 500. You look at insects, in particular BSF, we're getting at minimum 1.2 million pounds of protein per acre per year. And I think we're going to be able to push over 2 million pounds of protein production per acre per year. And we do this by farming vertically, and we do this by farming 365 days a year, and we think we can shorten that production time even further, probably another 20% by the end of the year, the way we're going. So this shows great promise. Now I think Ron, actually, you steal my slide. Very similar slide. Now if you look at a couple things going on here is one of the fastest growing segments of agriculture in the world is aquaculture. But the problem we also have here is today 1 billion people depend their livelihood and their sole source of sustenance from the oceans. And as we know, the oceans, there's a finite amount of fish, we're overfishing, and we have things such as ocean acidification and climate change. And that does not bode a very good future for what's going on with the oceans today unless they're managed better. Well, aquaculture, we think, is the way to go. We came up with this independently. And even though we think all the forecasters saying is the population will increase, we have to increase food supply, we're looking at this very optimistically. Is in order to get aquaculture moving forward, there has to be a lower cost of protein, is to reduce what I call that fish in, fish out ratio. And we can do this by using insects to augment vegetable-based diets to balance out the amino acid and the fatty acid profile for raising our fish in a cost-effective and a sustainable way. So, like I said before, I think the future is very promising. We're very optimistic that as we bring this technology online, technologies such as insects, single-cell proteins, can actually basically minimize the amount of wild-caught fish meal or other animal-based proteins, and bringing clean proteins, clean substrates into the aquaculture industry to help propel the industry moving forward in the next decades. So basically, I like to say is we're raising the bug to feed the fish, to feed the people, and we're in the very early stages, and with that, bugs save the world. So thank you.
What is the current regulatory status, U.S. and some of the other major countries?
In the August meeting of AFCO, the dried larvae were approved by the Ingredient Definition Committee for use in salmonids. There are current pending in the dossiers going forward, looking to expand the definition to poultry, and we're working on a dossier to have the meal approved as a feed ingredient as well. So it's a iterative approach to get regulatory approval in the U.S. Canada has already approved the dried larvae for use in poultry. And within the U.S., we have individual state approvals for into the specialty pet food sector.
What are you doing with the oil in particular?
Oil right now is being kept in the freezer, and we're doing a number of feed trials. As it stands now, we're getting ready to launch a number of feed trials over the next few months to look at things such as gut health. For example, some of the anecdotal data suggests that lauric acid is a benefit to actually improve the immune system. But we want to have empirical data on that versus anecdotal. So we need to run some additional trials. We have interest of all things of using the oil and turning it into a surfactant and injecting into oil wells for fracking. Because C12 makes a great solvent for cleaning up oil wells. So what we do here is right now we're selling into the marketplace what's generating revenue, but we're not throwing anything away. So we've got, say, tons and tons of oil standing by and looking at different ways of getting it refined properly, but we're not in a big hurry. And if you have any interest, let me know. We can get you a couple tons. I'm thinking it might make our hair grow back.
We could use it.
Just wondering about price. How does the price compare right now per pound compared to a moderate quality fish meal?
Right now we're higher, but it's all about scale. So today we're selling today, of all things, like we sell for $5 a pound because we can. And when production levels go up, price will naturally come down, but hopefully it won't go down too low. Unlike some of our competitors, I'm not trying to dive down to the treetop level as fast as possible. We'll look at this today as a boutique ingredient for a boutique market until we prove out some of the other assertions that we have as improving fish health. We think will work very well in fry diets, and go after those premium markets first. And there's no reason to, like I said, go bulk discount pricing right out of the chute. We don't have to.
Yes, very, very interesting, fascinating, actually. Right away, though, is this one of the companies that Jack was mentioning that Extria, I can't pronounce
Entrexon
fully owns?
Yeah, what happened is I sold the company to Entrexon in February of this year. And I mentioned to a few other folks here that we were courted by a number of companies to buy the technology, and we held off. We wanted to find the right partnership that would take this technology forward. And, I look at it, this was my baby. Now, and having a sense of ownership for this and passion for this industry moving forward, getting connected with the right company that had the right mindset and was working on the proper long-term view was a right way to bring this industry to fruition. Now, what we did when we sold, we immediately formed a joint venture with a company called Darling Ingredients. Darling is one of the largest animal protein distributors. They're a rendering company. So this fit well with their production mindset. So if you look at Entrexon, from having a biotech view, a clear understanding of science and technology was kind of the world I came out of, coupled with Darling, with manufacturing, logistics, process, regulatory. We kind of got our yin and yang there. So and I'm caught in the middle. So,
Well, actually, my real question was, thank you, was the raw material, the feedstock. You mentioned it the little bit of understanding I have, that's just not next door, right? You're sourcing that from all over the place, or I'm very intrigued with that.
All right, the way we set up now is the pilot plant's in Yellow Springs, Ohio. The technology is modular. We can put it anywhere in the world. So our pilot plant is about 20,000 square feet of production. We've worked closely with the ethanol industry. For example, we can bolt up next to an ethanol plant and take what we call the wet stillage before it goes into the dryers and centrifuges to process that and recover the nutrients. But we want to be very clear on our feedstock selection. We're not processing garbage and trash. We are avoiding post-consumer waste. We're working, if you look at the hierarchy of waste products, we want stuff that is guaranteed to be clean, is traceable. And one thing I think I want to ask a question earlier on is we are now fully FSMA compliant within our plant. So for us, the goal isn't to go big fast. It's to go big at the right time with the right level of traceability and structure and very methodical. Right. Right. And we're processing semi-loads of material a week out of a small facility.
Any other questions?
You had quoted a $5 price for the
Mm-hmm.
carbon. Have you thought about a price for the whole?
As much as we can get. Now, the oil depends on the use. Right now, we have it in this crude form. Now, it depends on the level of processing we have to do. We've done a couple of things with using a water wash to clean it up. We centrifuged it out, whether it's feed grade or if we want to take it into the cosmetic side. So right now, we are open to alternatives or ideas. But worst case, we turn it into biodiesel and call it a day and sell it for example, say somewhere between yellow grease and coconut oil prices. We think its value is more as in a feed value or as a specialty chemical.
We use a product on our post-production of feed and spray the oil on it to raise the fat content and also eliminate the fines.
Right.
That's a fairly expensive ingredient when we look at the total ingredients.
Sure.
So I would think a feed producer would be open to using the oil as a finishing.
We've had talks with a number of feed producers, and kind of give you a little anecdotal solution. We have our office dog named Payday, and we kind of use him as he kind of turns into his own self-determined guinea pig. If we're back pressing oil, we can't keep the dog away, and what we found is just by using it as my head engineer came out of IAM's pet food. We really believe this has a benefit as a coating, as an attractant. And it's also, we believe, is hypoallergenic. One of our competitors in Europe is promoting the oil as something for hyperallergenic pet feeds and also for early stage swine diets. But we have to get through the regulatory hoops before we can make any claims. So you can tell I'm trying to be somewhat reserved on, I don't want to push product out until we have the studies and the regulatory approvals. Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of byproducts from coffee, sugarcane, or beets. Have you tried any of that?
We've tried beet pulp. We've tried coffee. They all work. Beet pulp has a little excess fiber, which is kind of a problem, milling it down to a small, but it all works. So for us, we like to have a residual, we like to have a fiber level of about 5 to 6%. And we use that fiber as a nitrogen sink. I don't want to give away all my secrets.
Coffee, does that, the caffeine have any impact?
We use that for the Love Shack. Okay.
Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank our two speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.